Right, guys. Uh, Hi, everybody, and welcome to our show. Oh, Slav, they don't know who we are. I mean, they're like looking at us and they don't know who we are. So maybe it would make sense to introduce each other or to introduce ourselves. As soon as I started,
Do
I
I
would.
know you?
Yeah,
No,
you
not
do.
really.
You do. We grew up together, man. Anyway, people of free world. Hi, my name is Denis. I used to be a Russian writer. And a very popular one, by the way. I used to be happy and independent, writing horror stories until Russia decided to make a horror story in real life. So, starting from the 24th of February, I'm not a Russian writer anymore for obvious reasons. And since that time, I'm trying to explain, first of all, to myself what the hell is going on. What the hell is going on? That's what I am. Slav?
Well, yeah, my name is Slav, and I realized something's wrong way back in 2014. Actually, I realized that I'm already on the shooting list because I participated in both Maidan protests and was even running for office as a regional representative from the pro-Ukrainian Democracy Party. So currently, I live out of Ukraine. I work as an IT agile coach, and basically, mm, I've been dedicating lots of my time and energy trying to warn people that this was bound to happen. We were seeing that from afar, just nobody cared enough or tried hard enough to fix, to prevent what was coming.
Okay, so now they at least know who we are. We are not analytics. We are not politicians. We are not decision makers. And we're not influencers. We are two simple Ukrainians that are trying to survive this horrible war. And that brings up another question. If we're not politicians, if we're not decision makers or whatever else, why the hell should you listen to us? Are we going to make a difference? No. What we are trying to do here, we are trying to explain how it happened that in the 21st century, in the middle of Europe, such an atrocity is happening as a Ukrainian war. And we're trying to explain that to ourselves because, for obvious reasons, we don't understand it. But explaining it to ourselves is not enough. So we decided to try at least to involve you guys into the equation. And maybe you would get interested and maybe you would become a part of our discussion. So that answers another question. Why should you listen to us? You should not. You should become a part of our discussion. And maybe you will learn something new. And maybe we should learn something new.
Yeah, maybe for all those years we were just asking wrong questions.
Yeah, but that brings up the biggest one, actually. So how in the world this whole thing happened? And we've been asking me and Slav, we've been talking about that since the very beginning of war, because back in winter it was absolutely unbelievable because everybody understood that this war cannot last for longer than 3 days. Same was the idea of Russians to end this war in 3 days and invade the whole of Ukraine. But instead, they woke up the demons within Ukrainians, and we could, people in Europe they don't understand what are we fighting for. I mean, Russians and Ukrainians appear to be the same for Americans, for British people, for even for Polish people. We speak similar language. We do. We have similar culture. Yes, we do. Uh, so, what are we fighting for? And in order to understand that, we have to give you a bit of a history lesson. What do you think, Slav?
Mm, well, hopefully not a boring one. because
Yeah,
you can find lots of good history lessons on YouTube. But on the other hand, I meet people from all over the world. In IT, people are working not just from Europe and Americas, but all the way from India, Africa, Arab countries. And yes, for example, there is a common opinion that Ukraine should have been crushed, the so-called second army in the world. Well,
yeah,
if
that's
this
what they
army is
said.
losing battles,
That's
who
what they
are the
said.
first army? So why history lesson? Presentation.
Apparently, you're absolutely right. Because if we start talking about history, we'll go all the way down to Stone Age. And yes, people say that Russians and Ukrainians are the same. Not the same. We are similar, like Italians and Spaniards, for example, are similar, but nobody will. In his own right mind, will dare to call Italian identical to Spaniard. I think we should forget about history and we should start from 2014. That's when the things started to get really ugly, you know. And at that time, what happened then actually is that our good old president Yanukovych decided that the path of Ukraine is with Russian Federation. And instead of signing a treaty with the European Union, he decided all out of a sudden to change his mind and sign an agreement with Russian and Belarusian trade union, so called, which led to certain student protests, if I'm not mistaken. And instead of
Dennis, do you
listening,
remember how I was shocked? Because Yanukovych appeared way better than I expected during the election period when I was actually begging everyone to avoid voting
Mhm,
Yanukovych.
mhm.
So then, for two reasons, when the European Championship in soccer was happening and the things, well, appeared to be normal, I
Yeah,
started
yeah.
to get hope. And then, damn, what is it? Like a turnaround in just one day, one visit to Putin, and our president is gone. It's a different
No, no,
person.
no. You have to remember that before that visit to Putin, Yanukovych actually promised Ukrainians that our ways are with the European Union. That's what he said. And then all of a sudden he says, okay, no, 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 no. We have our brotherhood Russia right by our side. Europe is one thing, Ukraine is another thing. So we're with Russia. And that led to those student protests. Okay, shit happens. Student protests happen all over the world. But instead of listening to those students, Yanukovych decided to beat the shit out of them. And that's what he did. And the worst thing was that it happened near Christmas, the holy period for every country. Uh, so he beat the crap out of those students. And then I understand that when he was doing that, he thought that it would be enough to use police brutal force to stop that. But instead, he got himself a revolution on hands, and a big one. And that revolution actually led to Yanukovych being taken down as a president and disappearing in the midst of Russian Federation. I believe he still lives somewhere in Russia. But what happened then? Then we got Mr. Putin. Do you remember that actually Yanukovych was the one who asked Putin for help? There was that
Yeah.
day when Yanukovych literally called Putin and asked him to bring the military forces to Ukraine to protect Ukraine from decapitation of power, etc., etc., etc.
By the way, many of my friends here, they are not, for example, understanding the mystery that ensued because it's possible to expect that if some people get hurt, get shot right in the middle of a capital city, there would be a proper investigation, and the perpetrators would be brought to justice. However,
Absolutely.
instead, Yanukovych chooses to run away. He was flying all over the country, obviously being afraid that they will land him, by force. And then he made it to Russian military base in Crimea,
Mhm.
and that's how it all started. But I
I
guess
have
he
a
was not the only
question
one to run
that I
away.
don't understand. Yanukovych calls Putin and asks him to officially asks him, because he was still a president of Ukraine, and he officially asks him to assist Ukraine in a military way by stopping the revolution. And Putin says nothing. Why didn't he do that in 2014? Why didn't he bring down the force?
Well, yes. Instead, he's taken in the Yanukovych. He's taken in alleged murderers of people,
Mhm.
and put his military secretly into Crimea. You
No,
remember
that's
the
that. Come on,
little
come on. That's
gray
a different.
man?
That's a different thing. That's a different question. We'll talk about that. But what I don't understand is why in the world Putin did not answer Yanukovych at that time and did not bring his troops to Ukraine, to Kiev. Because if he did that in 2014, there is a good chance that he would have stopped everything and we would have been living in Russia now.
Mm, yeah, well, it's maybe God helping Ukraine.
That's one thing.
However, well, there are different opinions. For example, in USA, there are two schools of thoughts. Essentially, Democrats and Republicans, they have their own think tanks, and there are, the last remaining balance, outspoken journalism outlets like Newsweek, for example, which
Mhm.
is printing opinions from both sides. And they are quoting some experts who were expecting Putin to aim at some sort of a deal.
Mhm.
Basically, even now, say I was reading opinions starting maybe March or even April, and they were paying attention that the same guy who's bombing the hell of Ukrainian cities right now, he
Right.
was pointed twice the same position. He already started his bombing once, but then the bombing was stopped. And
Mhm.
they think that Putin is aiming at some sort of negotiation. Maybe because he was the first to realize that the second army is losing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what he thought back in 2015.
I wouldn't agree with you because he is a megalomaniac and he was absolutely sure that he would win. I mean, that brings up another thing, what happened in Crimea. Because many people say that Ukrainians or Ukrainian government at that time, which was led by Mr. Poroshenko, committed a treason by not protecting Crimea. Personally, I think that we're blessed that we were not trying to protect Crimea at that time. Because, A, let's be honest, we didn't have army at that time. I mean, we didn't have powers, we didn't have forces to protect our own. And second thing, you remember how it happened? You remember that Putin actually, you're absolutely right, brought his military forces secretly, and people of Crimea actually embraced the idea of Russian world, so-called Russian world. So it wasn't like Putin invaded Crimea. He gave them that idea, implanted the idea in their heads, and funny, but we have to admit that a very large number of Crimeans supported Russian Federation at that time. Uh, More to say, they were absolutely scared by new nationalistic ways of Ukrainian government, and they were afraid that Ukraine will Will make them use Ukrainian language, will make them stop using Russian language, will make them forget about Russian religion, Russian literature, Russian culture, etc. And that's when Putin came. Actually, I still think that this is the greatest victory Putin has ever committed in his whole entire political career, because that silent invasion was bloody impressive. What can we say?
Well, imagine someone has stolen a territory of a mid-sized European country like Belgium.
Yeah, yeah, and the world was silent. Yes, okay, you may say, but they didn't accept Crimea on the map of Russia, blah blah blah. But the world was silent. That's what we saw, actually. Nobody said, Ukrainians, guys, you have to fight for your country. We'll help you out. NATO was silent. UN was silent. Everybody kept silent. They were just looking at us and, counting the chances. What's going to happen next? Are these guys going to fight for their country or not? We chose not to. And once again, I say we were blessed for not doing that, because if we tried, there would be no Ukraine at all. Putin was ready. He was ready to fight at that time. Because you remember what happened next after Crimea, and simultaneously to Crimea, the eastern part of Ukraine came, so called Donbas. Do you think it's the
Not
identical
just the
story?
eastern part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, there were pro-Russian movements as well in Odessa, for example.
Yes, absolutely. But okay, that's a very, very interesting question. So before we move to Donbas, let's talk about Odessa. And by the way, when we were introducing ourselves to you guys, we forgot to tell you that originally we're both from Odessa, and I still stay in Odessa. Slav is in Riga, Latvia, for the last few years. Um, so Odessa, before we move to Donbass, it's very important to talk about Odessa. I remember these days very well. May 2014. Actually, that was when we came to the Russian world that close. We had quite a big support of Russian Federation in Odessa. We had people that were waiting for Russians to come and take us back to Russia, as they said. And then something happened. So why do you think Odessa is not a part of Russian Federation now? Why is it still a part of Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I still remember the horrible day when I turned on, the news, basically to make sure that everything's fine
Yeah,
in the town where my family, lives. And then I hear that instead of, the parade of football tifosis, from Kharkiv to the Chernomorets stadium, like instead of singing, beating drums, carrying their flags, etc., there were shots fired at them.
yeah,
So I turn on, the live broadcast, and I can see that the shooters are actually protected by police.
absolutely right. That's how
And
it looked like.
I'm calling my friends who were in already formed first self-defense militia, which did not have any weapons. They had just, wooden shields and, clubs. Basically, they were supposed to be supporting, some kind of law and order to prevent, for example, fight of the mentioned tifosos. And instead, one of my friends get shot at and wounded almost at once. That's Andre, you know him.
Yeah, yeah,
And a few people are shot dead.
yes,
The ambulance is also trying to ignore the wounded instead of helping them. police are running away or becoming paralyzed all of a sudden when asked for help, and everything looks like horror, honestly.
So before, let me interrupt you just to remind uh, whoever is listening to us about these most horrible minutes in life of Odessa in the 21st century. What Russians say, they built a cult out of this day, the 2nd of May. What they say is that Ukrainian nationalists, they call us Bandera soldiers, actually started a fight with peaceful pro-Russian Protestants in the middle of the city, then brought them down to Kulikov Square, which is a big square right in the middle of Odessa by the railway station. And pro-Russian Protestants tried to hide themselves in administrative building, obviously, and horrible Ukrainian nationalists burned them down. They started throwing Molotov cocktails at them, and everybody got burned down. So that's what Russians say, and they keep on saying that for the last 8 years. They keep on saying that that they know who did that they know everybody who was responsible for killing those peaceful Protestants, and one day they will come back to Odessa, and Odessa will become a part of Russian Federation. When that day comes, they will most definitely arrest all those guilty for these atrocities and blah, 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 and all that bullshit. Because in reality, a minute ago, you said that your friends were shot by people who were protected by the police. And that's exactly what I saw, actually. And I was in Odessa on the 2nd of May. And I saw it, actually. I saw that the police was kind of paralyzed, as if they were waiting for something, as if they were waiting for instructions. And yes, certain bad things, really bad things, happened on Kulikov Square. But we cannot say that Ukrainian nationalists killed unarmed and innocent people who just wanted to become a part of Russian Federation. Those people were by no means unarmed, and they were by no means peaceful. More to say, they were absolutely sure that they are protected and that their time had come. So I believe that on the 2nd of May, we came very close to really losing our state, our national identity, and becoming a gray zone. Not a part of Russian Federation, most definitely, but a gray zone.
By the way, also one detail from insiders, the firefighter station is located within 5 minutes walk from the Kulikov Square.
Not drive, walk.
First thing, the first thing basically the self-defense people did, they went there and asked the firefighters to come out immediately, because the so-called pro-Russian protesters, they were reading Molotov cocktails while barricading themselves in a multi-storied building, obviously determined to throw Molotov cocktails at whoever will try to approach this building.
Yeah.
So the firefighters also refused to come out of their station, which brings us to your point about Crimean situation. I would say that for most thinking people, it was obvious that traitors at the moment were not just president, but at every level of at least military, paramilitary, so-called law enforcement.
I think yes. I think they were. I think they were waiting for orders. I think they were waiting for what's going to happen. And you're absolutely right. That story about firefighters is well known to all Odessa dwellers, at least. The station is in the nearest vicinity. You can actually look at it from that place where the fire broke down, and they did not come. For 55 minutes, nobody came. By the time firefighters actually showed up, it was over. And 55 people got burned alive. And then there is another thing that Russians keep on telling the world. They keep on saying that pro-Russian protesters tried to jump out of the windows, and Ukrainian fascists were beating them down with clubs and bats and things like that. Now that's bullshit. That's bullshit. The first part of this equation is true. They were jumping from the windows because they were trying to evade fire. The second part is absolute bullshit because Ukrainian guys, I mean, they were all Ukrainians, but pro-Ukrainians guys, they actually tried to assist them, tried to help them, tried to break down the fire on their bodies. And there are video evidences of that. But that brings up the most horrible thing that I'm planning to say now. I think that if this 2nd of May never happened, then Odessa would have been a part of Russia now. 50, more than 50 people died in a horrible way, and we still grieve them. Whoever they were, it doesn't really matter. They died in a horrible way. We feel that this is a black page in the history of Odessa. But if it didn't happen, then by now, Odessa would have been occupied. That's my personal opinion.
You are right, because that's exactly the same situation that Putin could not calculate in his plans. Again, now in February of this year, situation was very same. People were scared, people were lost, but they would rise to protect their home, their beloved ones, because what was easy to understand for somebody who is living in Odessa and loves this city and knows people from both sides is that the Russian attack basically lasted in the central part of the city around 40 minutes. And why is it so? Because it takes around 40 minutes for a bus from the worker outskirts, from the suburbia to reach the city center.
Right.
So the moment the first gunshots were fired and somebody says, look, there is police protecting them, everybody just got on the phone.
Yeah, yeah.
And basically from Поселок Kotovskovo to Tairova, everybody just came there without, any preparation. And unfortunately, if we had a proper police investigation, which was not possible in this situation, but there was a large group, once again, it was multi-party, it was from both sides of conflict. The activists, they tried to persuade police to properly investigate what happened. Because imagine thousands of people showed up to protect Odessa. Similarly, like territorial defense, basically, people retired from army, people retired from everywhere, or just some local activists, they stopped the second army in the world.
That's a miracle, actually. Well, we thought it is a miracle, and from the moral point of view, it is. But it appears that second army in the world is maybe second army in the world from the other end. That's what they forgot to tell us. Anyway, so that was back in 2014, the black page for Odessa, and Odessa survived. But Donbas area did not survive. And actually, the scenario, which was taken in action by Mr. Putin, was the same. He started those small local revolutions in the cities of Donetsk and Lugansk, and for some reason, those revolutions succeeded. Why do you think they were successful? They were not successful in Odessa and successful in Donetsk and Lugansk. People there are less patriotic, less Ukrainian. They tend to love Russia more. I believe things have changed since 2014, but we're talking about 2014 now. So why did they succeed? I mean, Russians in Donbass.
Well, we shouldn't treat all the people who inhabit certain town as they're all the same. That would be oversimplification, and I would
Absolutely.
say disrespectful. I know a few very patriotic people who were always pro-Ukrainian. Well, such historical, people like poet Stus, for example, or
Mm,
some modern day heroes, simple people. All the cool rock bands I appreciate. They actually left Donetsk and moved all the way to Western Ukraine instead of, for example, moving to Russia, though they had this choice. So I would say, yes, the force that was applied in around Donetsk was overwhelming. Why was it so? On one hand, the really small distance to the Russian border,
yeah,
because they, it's a day's walk. But if it's in car, it's like a few minutes travel.
absolutely.
Uh, though, of course, you would ask, for example, why there wasn't a rebellion in Sumy, which is also very close to the border.
Hmm,
And
hmm.
it was occupied at once recently in February. And they put up a fight. As you know, it was an amazing fight. I have a friend who lives there, and he sent me the pictures he's taken. When he got out of the cellar after 3 days of shelling. He decided to get some food for his two small children and wife, and he just sends me this, guru, absolutely
Hmm.
shocking video of burning Russian tanks, dead bodies everywhere, mutilated, and
So this is
locals are
listen.
peacefully,
This is a
regarding this.
very
Look, we got those fuckers.
this is a
So
very interesting thing actually because that's what we are to explain to ourselves and to our viewers. Sumy is on the border with Russia. Kharkiv area is just a minute walk from Russia, actually, because between Kharkiv and Belgorod of Russia is just a line. More to say, Kharkiv was quite a pro-Russian city before the 24th of February 2022. And still, Kharkiv is fighting like a lion. Kharkiv is fighting like hell. I personally know a couple of people who used to be pro-Russian before this war. Now they're in the territorial defense of Kharkiv. Uh, so why in the whole entire world Kharkiv is patriotic, Sumy is patriotic, and at the same time Donetsk and Lugansk tend to be so pro-Russian? And you are absolutely right, and it's politically incorrect and morally incorrect to say that every dweller of Donbass is pro-Russian traitor. No, it's not so. Most definitely, this is not so. I think there are still people living in Donbass who do not understand what in the world happened in 2014. And frankly, I don't live in Donbass, but I still don't understand how in the world they bought that piece of crap Russia sold them, because they didn't become a part of Russia. That's what they wanted to become, like Crimea. Uh, and Crimea got the big prize. They became a part of Russia. At least Putin says so, which is not true, because Crimea is Ukraine, as we both know. But Donetsk did not become a part of Russia. They became a part of nowhere. And no one is interested in them. No one cares about them. No one gives a crap if they're alive or dead, but they still support Russian Federation. You know, recently I had a chat with a guy who just came back from war. He spent 6 months there. And I asked him, uh, have you met motivated Russian soldiers? He said, I haven't met motivated Russian soldiers, but I've met the motivated people from Donetsk who think that all Ukrainians are child-eating beasts, and they have a motivation of hating us. So this is what I don't understand. What happened to these guys? And how in the world Putin implanted that weird hatred in the midst of their brains?
Yeah, by the way, I don't guarantee you we could get all the answers at once. For example, there are
Sure.
lots of details you and me know about the defense of Odessa back in 2014. I personally know people from the dead and people who survived and actually got out of the building. And similarly, I know people who made it out of Donetsk in time, when the
Mm.
Russians were incoming.
Hmm.
So we should, I think, go into the question of propaganda,
Okay.
as a sci-fi writer who was actually creating worlds. I think you are the expert who can explain me how come people of Odessa, even in Crimea, as you might remember, there was huge anti-Russian protest. Many people died actually
Yeah, 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 absolutely. You're
protecting
right.
their government buildings.
Hmm.
So, how come the reality of protecting one's home, family, and well-being played out for most of Ukraine, but it failed for Donetsk and Lugansk? And I think this is a bit connected to the question of what is Russia, and even I would say that I would avoid using the word Russian in our discussions because it's racist. It's like if some part of soul, I don't know, of behavior is inherited, which is not true. There is, mentality which is formed by an entire lifetime, and I guess the history of some
Hmm. Hmm.
country. There is a culture. People can be more open, less open. There are, subcultures like goth music lovers wearing black, rave lovers going to all white parties. So
Hmm.
those factors in place somehow they separate the Russian speakers, the Russian people who live in free world, outside the Russian Federation, and the I would call them Ruskies, but some call them orcs or
Hmm.
Russians. I don't know. Definitely, like when they call the system they build there a mortar, but mortar is doing something to people that somebody who's Russian by birth or somebody who's from Buratian Buddhist, Chechen Muslims, all those nationalities, they're all made into some crazy horde that's invading their neighbors. And yes, Donetsk and Lugansk, they were consumed by this plague, but they did not rise to protect their home. It looks like
You
they fell
uh,
into this
you
invasion.
are actually saying something that we shall have to return to, maybe not today, maybe next time, because it's a part of a very big question, actually. You mentioned guys from Buryatia, and Buryatia is actually a part of Russian Federation. It is very important for our viewers to understand that Buryat people are Buddhists. And Buddhism is not a religion, it's a philosophy. And this philosophy is as far from war as anything can be. It's extremely peaceful way of um, understanding yourself and your part in the universe. At the same time, our viewers have to understand and have to know that most atrocities that occurred during this war during the last 8 months were done by Buryats. For example, the horrible massacre of Bucha and Irpin was committed by Buryats, by peaceful Buddhists. And when you say that Russia, or some people call it Mordor, so Mordor is doing something to humans, changing them into this one horde, you're absolutely right. Because, okay, when we're talking about Chechen guys, when we're talking about Muslims, some would say, and it would be incorrect, that but Muslims have this long history of killing people, of fighting with Christians. Well, okay, you may say that partially this is true, even though a good Muslim would always tell you that Muslim religion is a peaceful religion. And it's very far from, well, proclaiming that a regular Muslim has to rape and kill people. But Buddhists, they they don't preach any violence at all. They've never preached any violence at all. So how did it happen that a simple guy preaching Buddhism became a butcher of Irpin, which is a small, sleepy town near Kiev, and what happened there actually shocked the whole world. So you are right when you say that contemporary Russia is changing the psychology of people somehow by actually making them mutants, psychological mutants. And this is a very big question that we shall have to come back to, because it's a question of propaganda. It's a question of how people lose their right to be called people, actually. And of course, the huge part of this question is that we cannot say that all Russians are turned into orcs, or that all people living in Russia are orcs, or all those who speak Russian are orcs, etc. This is bullcrap. It makes no sense. But still, I think it would be extremely hard to find an answer why Donbass became so pro-Russian at that time. The, the way New Ukraine was born, because when Yanukovych was taken down and Poroshenko became a president, he was a breakdown for the country, for the political system of the country. Yes, the old political system ceased to exist. The old ways of thinking ceased to exist, and new system was just being built. And of course, now it is very, it is a sort of a fashion to say that Yanukovych is nothing but the reflection of Poroshenko, and Poroshenko is nothing but the reflection of Yanukovych. It's very fashionable to say that Poroshenko was a bad president, but I don't think it's a good idea to criticize this president only due to one thing. He was the first one, actually, after the breakdown of power, and being first one is extremely hard. And of course, he made his mistakes. And of course, everybody can say, okay, Poroshenko gave away Crimea. Poroshenko started this war in the eastern part of Ukraine and had no power to stop it. But I don't think it's so, actually. I think that, well, maybe Poroshenko didn't have enough, political vision to to draw Ukraine out of the mess it was put into. But most definitely, Poroshenko did his best to protect the country. And when some people say that if not, but if it was somebody else, if it wasn't Poroshenko, then maybe there would be no war now. Okay, come on, this is bullcrap.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, this is wishful thinking, recent meltdown by Elon Musk on Twitter, with some mix of fake and real history and his ideas. Well, he's undoubtedly an interesting thinker, but what would even make somebody think that orcs could be turned into humans? You see, I've met the first wave of Russian refugees who left the country right in the February, March, etc. of this year. And those people were quite often breaking their ties with their families in Russia. Because
Yeah.
imagine if somebody is Russian, but he hasn't got the orc mind, but everyone around him has it. I feel absolutely pity for these people because one person, for example, lost his life savings because he was, giving his earnings to his mother, trusting that she would, unite the money of the family.
Mhm.
Basically, I would say this is a frequently observed behavior. I'm not sure how about outside of Ukraine and Russia, but imagine this person calling home and learning that he's no more a son for his parents because he doesn't love Putin. And if you would ask me, is it possible to make peace with these people? Well, come on, their own child cannot make peace with them
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
child is normal, and this is a mental disease.
Okay, but let's go back to
Do
Donetsk
you
war.
remember I used to have hamsters in
Yeah,
childhood?
sure, sure, of
You
course.
remember how sometimes they eat their own litter, their own
Uh-huh.
children?
Yeah, yeah. You have to keep them divided actually.
Yeah, but something snaps. Normally they don't do. But if it snapped, you just have to separate. Otherwise, the children will be consumed.
Okay. On one side, I feel it is a bit insultive to compare human beings to hamsters. But
Yeah,
on
to
the other side,
hamsters, that's very insulting.
on the on the other side, I think that you're absolutely right, and certain reactions and certain psychological patterns of modern Russian dwellers are very similar to zoopsychology. And the only way to explain the way they behave themselves is zoopsychology. Okay, coming back to Donetsk. So in 2014, Russia peacefully takes Crimea, takes over Donetsk. And if you remember, there was an episode when Russian forces were actually standing 5 minutes away from Mariupol. And we all were thinking that the war, the big war, began and they're going to invade Mariupol. Then all out of a sudden, they turned around and they went back to Russia. Why didn't Putin move further at that time? Because I think that if he did, that was his chance. He had a chance to invade our country big time. And what that was back in 2014.
Mm. Well, then it's really painful to think about because you might not know that I actually had an uncle who was a sergeant in Ukrainian military. So entire Ukrainian military back then was less than 10,000 people. Active servicemen were 2 or 3 brigades, total number around 5,000. And the actual attack by Russian forces, it started around a place named Ilovaisk.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle's military unit was sent to help um, the volunteer fighters who were surrounded in Ilovaisk to make their way out. And
Mm-hmm.
instead, you might have heard that when there was supposed a corridor open for the Ukrainian forces to leave, instead the Russians started shooting and the
Yeah.
massacre ensued because they agreed that it's a green corridor, like get out with your hands raised without weapons, etc. So basically, this mass murder resulted into my mm, uncle dying in line of service. He
Right.
left a widow and a 1 year old orphan. So Well, to me, this was enough to understand that basically, if there is any kind of stopping, it was not because of something good on Putin's mind. Uh, yes, maybe he is interested in some kind of negotiations, but on his own terms. And even if people agree with him and accept his terms, next moment he will shoot them in the back.
Yeah, yeah, that's what he does.
You see, Mariupol, it was captured by Russian paramilitary, and there was fighting inside of town, and the regular army could reach it because yes, it's 40 kilometers to the border,
Hmm.
and instead of saving their own supposedly Russian paramilitaries, they chosen to watch them die, trying to defend Mariupol. Well, just what Stalin did, for example, in the World War during Warsaw Uprising, when Nazis they were just crushing uprising, killing people in scores, and Russian army was told to stand down and do nothing.
Right.
So there was some kind of a plan in Putin's sick mind, but what kind of plan was that? I cannot tell because we both know our common friend who's got a psychiatrist's father. Now that's the person who might have some opinion about it.
It seems to me, Slav, that you're absolutely right. And the more I look at the logics of Mr. Putin, the more I understand that this guy is absolutely sick. I mean, physically, mentally, he is sick. And in this very case, it is impossible to predict his further actions, and it is really hard to explain his past actions because I'm absolutely sure that back in 2014, if he decided to move, he had a chance of invading the whole of Ukraine because we were not ready for that kind of war at that time. But he didn't move, which reminds me of your words that God protects Ukraine. So maybe it's God who protected us at that time. And then for 8 years, for 8 years, we had that stand. We had a gray zone, which the world knows as Donbass. That gray zone did not belong to anybody, and they didn't even belong to themselves. They didn't have economics. They didn't have life. We had a war going on, but it was a small local war here and there. People were dying on a daily basis. Actually, every day when I went to work, I opened up my computer, I read the news, and I read that okay, two Ukrainian soldiers died, three Ukrainian soldiers got wounded, somebody was captured, blah 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 blah. And I got used to it. And I think this is the biggest mistake that Ukraine committed because we all are a part of Ukraine and we all got used to this situation and we all thought that it's normal that somewhere a long distance from where we live, there are people dying, there are people shooting at each other, and we stopped thinking about this area. We stopped following the news about the Minsk agreements, things like that, and we didn't care about them because we had lives of our own.
So no
Which,
surprise, no surprise that people of US, European Union, they did not, also actively push for resolution of this conflict the way we hoped. We had this treaty actually signed, you might remember, with US, UK, Russia, and who was there? I think also France, the nuclear powers of the day,
right.
when Ukraine has surrendered the third biggest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world for the guarantees of peace, of territorial integrity and protection.
Oh, we have
Which
to
did not
remind
happen.
that to our viewers. You have to repeat it once again that we've given up the third in the whole entire world biggest nuclear stock for the guarantees signed, by the way, by Russia. Russia was one of the counterparts signing that document saying, okay, Ukraine, give up all your nuclear weapons, but we shall never attack you. We shall guarantee your Jesus Christ, this is so funny. I'm sorry. So they signed it down. They were supposed to protect us. Maybe something got mixed up in their minds, and instead of protecting us, they decided to destroy us. God knows. But I have to repeat myself that we were unlucky and stupid enough to stop caring about the upcoming war. And for all these 8 years, since 2014, we kept on living our lives. We kept on building our country, actually. We kept on wandering around Europe. We kept on talking to our friends, building our families, etc. And at that very moment, somewhere in our country, the pot was boiling and boiling and boiling and boiling. And uh, uh, I have to tell you the truth. When in late autumn of 2021, British partners and Americans started to warn Ukrainians about the upcoming war, I was the first one to say, okay, this is bullshit. Russia will never, ever do such a thing. And my wife, who, as you know, is Russian, she kept on telling me, Dennis, you don't know Russians well enough. They will. They will. They are planning to invade us. They are planning to start a horrible war. And I was like, it will not happen. All my friends, maybe but you, but everybody else kept on saying, no, there will be no war. And we didn't even get ready for it, you know? We didn't get prepared. We thought that it's a sort of a hoax, that America is just trying to scare us.
But it's a shame, as we are the winners of Nazi axis. Ukraine is one of co-founders of United Nations, and you
Yeah.
might remember that Odessa is also the first in history of Soviet Union hero city, when not just some members of resistance were recognized, but entire city was awarded this hero status, which
Mhm.
is for a reason. And you might remember how Holocaust started in Odessa. It was horrible if you look at it from today's position. There is just announcement. All Jewish people like are ordered to come to gathering place. Bring your belongings in a suit, like whatever you need, like a change of dress, some toothpaste and toothbrush, and they did follow this order out of thinking like Germans are civilized people. We cannot expect anything bad from them.
Yeah.
And personally, I know people who actually stopped some Jewish people
Well,
because they
talking
could
about stoppers,
see this
talking about
insanity of this
stoppers.
behavior.
My great grandmother, she was in a crowd actually, and she lived in one of those commune flats. For those who don't understand what it means, a commune flat is a big apartment where a couple of families live together. And those families, they're not relatives, and they maybe not be friends. In most cases, they were not friends. They hated each other because they just had one kitchen, one WC, and they had to share it. So my great grandmother, she lived with this Russian family. By the way, it was a Russian family, and they hated her. They despised her, and they had all kinds of conflicts all the time. And on the day of the announcement, she hears the announcement and she starts getting prepared. She gathers her belongings, she gathers her documents, and when she is by the door, one of those Russian guys who hated her stops her and says, "Hey, wait a minute, where are you going?" And she's like, "But German guys said that we all have to go to that specific place." "Are you fucking crazy?" That Russian guy says. "They're gonna kill you all." Says, "No, no, no, no. Russian Germans will never do such a thing." "No, they will," the Russian guy says. "You have to stay here." And he actually stopped her from going and hid her in his room. And this was the guy who hated her. And she spent about a month in his room under his bed. So if not but him, I would have never been alive. Actually, what a story, you know. But what I never understood is how those Jewish people kept on going and going and going. They knew that they would get shot, and they still kept on going. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
Well, that's exactly the point I wanted to make. That this insanity it works both ways, and also it's not tied to nationality. Once again, Nazis were horrible perpetrators, and now we have a second Nazi invasion, formerly from the west. Now we have it from the east. And by the way, the Hitler's army it was not just made out of Germans. There were other countries involved, namely Italy, Romania, which is our good neighbors. I would say absolutely identical culture with minor differences. Um, Bulgaria, also neighbors. They have same letters and nearly identical language with us. Yeah, there was also Japan, but I think that's the only non-European country on this coalition. I think also there was some sort of Arabic countries involved, like they had to occupy Iran. But I stress, normally this murder addiction, it's not tied to nationality. It's rather
It's
tied to
not.
some ideology.
It's not. It almost seems to be a disease, you know, some sort of a brain worm that wakes up once in a century and turns adequate people into zombies. Because talking about World War II, I mean, how could we make a comparison between the nation that adored Schiller, Goethe, Goethe, etc., and the nation that built up concentration camps? These two things, they just do not coincide. And same refers to Russians. Actually, now it's very popular to say that Russians are the product of Russian culture. No, no bloody way. What's going on now has nothing to do with Dostoevsky, with Bulgakov, etc. It's not that Russians just came out of Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. They it's
Well,
really
I would
hard to.
say Dostoevsky's, famous ex-murder actually has something to do. Uh, but I wouldn't say that I seriously doubt that most of those people they were reading such long books, half in French with lots of small letters and no pictures.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I do support canceling while we're speaking of modern Russian culture, because I know that you stopped entertaining writing new literature for Russian. And
That's
I
yeah,
think what
yeah.
happened after war, to say Leni Riefenstahl, for example, absolutely genius, beautiful movies, but those were documentaries about Hitler, and just everybody started boycotting this movie maker. Nobody would um, sit with her in some conference of movie makers, and that's how she was basically sidelined out of art. And
I will tell you more. The horrible thing is that German culture is still recovering from World War II, and such a long period of time passed. But the world has a very long memory. And after this new war is over, after the Ukrainian war is over, Russian culture will suffer. And when I say Russian culture, I mean Russian literature, Russian movies, Russian music, everything. It will suffer the consequences of this war for decades. For decades, people would feel themselves sorry for speaking the language. So whatever Mr. Putin did, he carved a tombstone for his own country, and a huge one. And this tombstone will stand for a long time. Uh, but we're limited in time. Actually, we brought our viewers to the beginning of war, the 24th of February, 2022, the very beginning of war that I've never believed in. And I think it's a good stop for today. So then next time we can carry on from this period and talk about present time, talk about war and what it's how it changed us, and will how it is still changing us. What do you think?
Yes, and I hope we'll find maybe answers to some of the pressing questions, maybe with the help of audience, maybe with the help of this discussion. But yes, the war has been on for long enough. A baby could be born over this period of time. So the modern thinking people should start, coming up with at least some ideas. The time is ripe for some, good ideas to pop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think next time we can talk about how the war started, and how we changed the psychology of Ukrainians, and which is maybe even more important for the world to understand, how we changed the psychology of Russians and merged it into the present and contemporary psychology of orcs that is still not quite understood and not quite visible by the world. Because it seems to me, that Europe and America, they're still trying to find reasons, they're still trying to find reasons behind these or those actions of Russians, and they're still trying to reason with Russians and with Russia. And that is the biggest mistake they can make, because there are no reasons, and reasoning with these people is dangerous.
Yeah, people, I'm begging you, do not repeat our mistakes. We're using lots of Lord of the Rings terminology here, orcs, but just remember, don't be like Gondor's placeholder ruler. Don't be paralyzed like people of Rohan before it's too late.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to remember that orcs used to be elves, but they were mutated and they were turned into the creatures of darkness and creatures made out of dirt. And there is no way we can reason with this enemy. Whenever you start talking about negotiations, whenever you start talking about treaties, etc., they will only feel our weakness, and they will attack more and more and more. But we'll talk about that next time, I believe. Okay?
Yep. Thank
Slav, it
you.
was it was a great pleasure for me, definitely. I hope for you too, and I hope for those who would be listening and looking at our sad old faces, it would be a pleasure as well. Uh, I'm gonna see you around, man. Uh, Take care,
Yeah. Wish you a peaceful night.
and stay really safe. Cheers.
Cheers. Stay safe.